Hello, everybody. How's everybody doing today? Before we get going, I've already started a poll. I'm really interested to know how much bad data you think you have. So if you could just go, answer the question in the poll. And by bad data, I mean data that you can't use because it's wrong or it's incomplete. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I hope you're having a great day wherever you are in the world. In this session, I'm going to talk about how bad data is the plastic of the marketing ecosystem. And by the end, I will show you how you can start to quantify the cost of the bad data that you have in your company or with your clients. And I'm going to show you how much one of the companies that I work with should really pay to clean up the bad data that they have. Now, as you might have guessed, I'm going to walk through an example with quite a few tables, quite a few spreadsheets. And for those in the US, I'm sorry. I know the last thing you want to do on a Friday morning is go through spreadsheets, but it is what it is. Now, I've made the numbers as big as the template would allow, but if you can't see it, always remember you can go to the full screen option and you'll be able to see the numbers a little bit more clearly. All right. So Robert Swan said, the greatest threat to our planet is the belief that someone else will save it. Now, we all know there's a plastic problem, right? We've all seen the pictures of the turtles with the plastic bags around their necks, and we've seen the documentaries with those huge plastic islands in the middle of the ocean. And, we see the plastic when we go down to the shore, we go to the lake, we go down by the river, we see it. But that got me thinking about data and lead gen, because I'm just that big a geek. We know that we've got bad data, but because most of it's hidden underwater, like in an iceberg, we really don't know how big the problem is. But before we get into all that, I am Skip Fidura, and I'm a fractional CMO with a couple of different tech companies that are transitioning from startup to scale up, or as I like to say, from startup to smarten up. The companies have done some marketing, but because they're not marketing experts or they don't really have the time or they're working with the wrong suppliers, their marketing just really hasn't worked for them. They need a marketing leader to come in and set the go-to-market strategy and tactics or develop the messaging platform for that funding round. So I come in on a part-time basis, but unlike a consultant, I stay on through implementation. I coordinate resources, modify the plan as needed, work with the team to ensure that we get it right. So companies I work with get the consistency of a regular member of the team, but they can put the money into the marketing strategy rather than spending it on the marketing strategy. All right, so hopefully I can make this work. Let's have a look at those poll results. So I'm going to end the poll. Okay, so wow, that's a little scary. The vast majority of you, 46%, say you have more than 30% bad data. I really, really hope that's not true. I hope you're just being a little bit pessimistic. If that is true, definitely please feel free to give me a call. Now, we're in the middle of a once-in-a-lifetime event. I mean, hopefully, right? Here in the UK, we are sort of out of lockdown number 2, but I don't really know anybody that's going back to work. Nobody's really going back into the office anyway. But with a vaccine on the horizon, maybe this is the beginning of the end. It's really hard to say. But that's why the phrase the new normal totally winds me up. For the foreseeable future, normal will be nothing is normal. Normal will be that things will change almost every day. Normal will be that we have to pivot and adapt our channel mix and messaging strategy based on what's working and what's not. And here's the thing. As a marketer, that's our job. That's what we're supposed to be doing all the time. It's not new. It's just normal. My other issue with the new normal is it distracts from the things that have not changed. We still need to make sales. Sales come from a full pipeline, and you need data to fill that pipe. The other thing that has not changed but has become much more acute is that cash is king. And this is where we get to the crux of the problem. Traditional lead generation is very wasteful. The total cost of your bad data, including wasted ad spend, time wasted by sales, and lost revenue is 1.41 million pounds, or dollars, I guess. Or put another way, the cost of bad data increases the cost of your salespeople by 131%. Or at least that's how the numbers worked out for one of the companies that I work for. Now, we're a small company in the DevOps space, and we're transitioning, as I said, from a startup to a scale-up. And we were pretty far down the line of getting an investment round in before the pandemic. And part of that investment strategy included some pretty lofty targets, including a 10x increase in the number of active users within 3 years. So my first task was to put together a marketing strategy to hit that target. So I looked at the lead to close rate and their churn rate to calculate how many customers I would need to win over the next 3 years to hit that 10x target. We also audited the CRM to see how much bad data that we currently had. And whenever I do this sort of thing, I like to be conservative. So I assumed a few things. One, that we weren't going to be able to improve the conversion rate. That was just unfixable. Two, the churn rate would actually go up because of our aggressive growth targets. And three, that the amount of bad data would go up because we had to expand our lead sourcing into new channels that we never really played around in before. So as I said, spreadsheets, let's look at those numbers. So over the course of the year, we were going to need to add 10,000 net new companies into the database. And we were confident that we could get these at a blended CPL or cost per lead of 80 pounds. I also knew from their previous lead gen activity and my experience with other B2B tech companies and some industry research I did that left unchecked, probably 20% of the data we would get in would be bad. So, certainly not the 30%. I guess if I was really conservative, I would have gone that route. But I went with 20. So very simply, 20% of 10,000 is 2,000. And at a cost per lead of 80 pounds, we were down 160,000 pounds straight away, right off the bat. Now, once the data is in the pipeline, you hit the next problem, wasted time. Somebody said yesterday, they talked about the frenemy relationship between sales and marketing. And I think it's all down to bad data, right? Sales ask for more leads, but because of the bad data, they do not trust marketing. Of course, marketing thinks that all the leads they deliver are gold, and sales is incompetent and can't close them. So both groups come together, have an adult grown-up conversation. They might come to realize that bad data is wasting a lot of time. In fact, according to the US company Lead Gen, with a J, 27.3% of your sales team's time is wasted by bad data. That's ringing phone numbers that don't go through or emails that bounce. And then, of course, trying to correct all that data. So let's put that another way. We have 10 salespeople, and 3 are adding no value. And it's not because they're rubbish salespeople, but because we have rubbish data. Now, they could be rubbish salespeople as well, and then we're in real trouble. But assuming we did a good job hiring, then we have a sales team that spends almost 30% of their time banging their head against a wall. So according to payscale.com, the average sales director costs about 130,000 pounds, 108,000 pounds across salary, commission, and the company's NI contribution. But that highlights another interesting thing about the pandemic. The first time I did this presentation back in the spring, it was 130,000 pounds. So there's definitely been wage deflation during the pandemic, at least here in the UK. Anyway, so for this example, we're down to 108,000 pounds. So across the sales team of 10, we've just lost another 295,000 pounds. Now this leads to another source of salespeople's frustration. They live and die by their target because sales is one of the few jobs anywhere where the more effort you put in equates to more income. So they see each bad record as lost income, money taken right out of their pocket. And you know what? I see their point. I think they're right. So based on some research from Royal Mail Data Services and Data IQ, bad data also reduces turnover by 6% because once this bad data is in the system, obviously you lose the potential revenue up front. But even if you close it, you could lose potential repeat revenue when the deal comes up for renewal, when the contract comes up for renewal, because the person you have to talk to, now you don't have data for them. And now you've got to go through this whole process of, call your contact, get the right name, blah, blah, blah. So for this company, which has a turnover of 15 million, that 6% equates to almost 1 million pounds, 960,000 pounds left on the table. So if we do some quick math, right, you can see that bad data was costing us about 1.4 million. In other words, if we could fix this problem, we could improve the bottom line by 9%, just like that. That's before we'd actually done any marketing, right? We hadn't done any marketing. We just made the whole process better. Okay, so what did we do? That's great, Skip. I can hear you saying, okay, you're losing lots of money. We're all losing lots of money. How do we fix it? Okay, so there are 9 ways that data can go bad. And then, out of the 9, we had to pick the ones that we were going to focus on first. So let's look at the 9. The first is completeness. Does the data contain all the required parts? Now, I'm not talking about all the parts like first name, last name, phone number, right? I'm talking about, does each data field include all of its required parts? Like an @ sign in the email address is a really simple example. Now, the next one's pretty obvious, but you'd be surprised at how often fat finger syndrome creeps into our data. Is the data correct? Is the email address actually the one that goes with the person filling out the form? Now, even small companies have multiple databases, be it a CRM, Pardot, or some other marketing automation platform, or multiple marketing automation platforms. And there's always the spreadsheet on the salesperson's computer. So your data should be the same in every system. And if you're here in Europe, you went through a GDPR exercise, and it's probably worth doing that regularly to make sure that all the data is compliant and all the data is in one place, and you know where it all is. And as part of that process, you can make sure it's consistent across all of those, in all those places. Number 4 is a question of conformity. We all have legacy data, or even worse, legacy databases, with seemingly random codes that meant something to somebody at some point, but is now just a random code that really means nothing to anybody, right? The data needs to make sense. Now, uniqueness. This is really simple. Is a single thing in the real world represented by one entity in your data? In other words, no duplicates. We're in the people business, and we know that every individual is, well, individual, right? They're unique, so they shouldn't be in your database more than once. Now, while some might be tempted to call this whole exercise data integrity, in database management circles, the word integrity means that the data is not corrupted by the database itself, right? And this can happen when data is not mapped properly, say between Pardot and Salesforce, or where you've got data in one table, which doesn't appear in its corresponding lookup table. You've got a table with a customer ID in it, but you look up that customer ID in the customer table and they don't appear, right? Those kind of things creep in. And as we grow and develop and try new programs and try new tactics, we have to be really careful this doesn't happen. Now, number 7 is intention. And in this case, I'm talking about our intention to market to the lead, not the lead's intention to buy, right? That's a different kind of intention, and that's a topic for a different day. But if the lead doesn't have the right job title or lives in the wrong geographic region, right, you're never going to be able to sell them anything, or you may never want to sell them anything if their job title is too junior. You probably shouldn't be marketing to them. In fact, they probably shouldn't even be in your database, right? So what's your intention with this data? What are you going to do with it? Number 8, if we're going to have human conversations at scale where we react to our prospects' digital body language, we need to have access to that data in real time. It does us no good to have the data sitting in an inaccessible system. And again, if you can't access the data to achieve your marketing goals, you need to really ask yourself, should you hold that data at all? Last but certainly not least is freshness. Data has a shelf life. People change jobs. Research from Marketing Sherpa indicates that B2B data degrades at about 2.1% per month, which works out to 25 to 30% per year. So those people that said they had more than 30% data, if you're not doing something to proactively keep your data fresh and keep it, up to date, then you may be right. That's maybe a really good estimate. Now, I went through this really quickly. I'm happy to answer any questions on any of those specifically afterwards, but I wanted to get to the example. And all those matter, but what we focused on were these 4: completeness, accuracy, uniqueness, and intention. So let's take each of those in turn. We started with completeness. And again, this is not the completeness of the record. Through progressive profiling, we will build out a complete record, right? But in the first instance, we are capturing the minimum viable record. So it's critical that all the data we get is actionable. So we were collecting name, company name, email address, and phone number. Now, name and company name are free text fields, so you can't really codify completeness for those, right? But we should know all the parts of an email address, right? You got the name part, the @ symbol, the domain name, and a valid TLD, top-level domain. And we also collected phone numbers from around the globe. So we had to make sure that we had a valid country code. So how do we do that? What we did was we added field level validation to ensure the completeness for the email address and the phone numbers. It's really simple. For email address, I look for all those component parts. Well, I say it sounds simple. Actually, our first pass at it, we came up with 56 different validation rules across these two fields, phone number and email address. Now, the best part was that adding this validation didn't cost very much. We didn't have to go out and buy some new tech. All we had to do was go to our dev team and get some development resource, which I appreciate can sometimes be a big challenge. But once you see the business case for it, it's a pretty easy sell. But after that, it's straightforward to implement. Okay, now just because the data has all of its constituent parts doesn't mean you can actually still use it, right? There are two sources of inaccuracy in your data. While you could legitimately call the first one fraud, I prefer, it's Friday, let's be less cynical, let's call it nonsense, right? And I can almost guarantee that if I audited any of your databases, I would find at least one Mickey Mouse, or if you're based over here in the UK, potentially a Charles Windsor, the CTO of Buckingham Palace Industries. People think they're much funnier than they really are. And I have to say, these are the ones that can be repeated here. Most of the fake details that I see are very much not work appropriate. Essentially, what people want is they want your content for free, right? They want to download what you have, and they don't want to pay for it. They don't want to give you the data, hence the fraud. Now, the second source of inaccuracy I've already kind of touched on is fat finger syndrome. And users are trying to fill out a form on an iPhone while walking to that meeting or on a bus or basically doing too many things at once. And they're not trying to be obtuse, but at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter. If they entered a phone number in on purpose or accidentally, sales still can't get them on the phone. So still a problem. So what did we do? Well, on top of the validation rules, now we started to look for verification. And we did that before the user even left the form. So we built API connections to third-party verification services to check email addresses that they at least worked, right? They at least went to an inbox that accepted email. And phone numbers that have been assigned. Here in the UK, that's quite easy because all phone numbers are assigned from a central pool. And when we started looking at street addresses, we made sure that those were entered correctly, and that wasn't actually a street address that existed. And we kicked off that verification script when the focus changed to another field. And in most cases, we were able to verify the email and phone number before the user left the form. That is kind of what we call that vindication. When we found errors, we disabled the submit button and prompted the user to correct the problem before they left the form. Now, that didn't mean the errors didn't get through. In fact, we were quite worried about the false positives. We didn't want to exclude any good data by making the rules too strict. So, for example, we put a rule in place to catch name pairings that match the name of famous people. Some are obviously fake, Mickey Mouse, obviously fake. But I've got a follower on LinkedIn called Lewis Hamilton. He's a very nice guy, doesn't drive a Mercedes, much less a Formula One car. So it was critical that we built up trust with sales, and that these new initiatives were seen as a step in the right direction. So one of the first things we did was we started reporting on the number of records that were being corrected at the point of capture. We also set up a weekly meeting where we discussed the records that had gotten through, but also included errors. This allowed us to develop new rules where needed, but also have a discussion about what the implications of that was going to be, and ensure that sales was comfortable with any unintended consequences. In other words, anybody that didn't get through that might have been a great lead. And we also found some errors that just could not be corrected. So just because a phone number has been assigned doesn't mean it's been assigned to the person filling out the form. Same with email address. An email address might work, but might not be going to the person that completed the form. There's not much we can do about that. So with validation, we're sure that the field has all the parts that we need for it to be useful, and verification ensures that the email, phone number, and street address all basically work. That's brilliant. Okay, so let's accept that record and pop it into our CRM. Pop it into Pardot or Salesforce, depending on which way you've got it set up. Hang on, not so fast. What if that person is already in the database? Well, if we're collecting the data on our own form, that might be okay, because we can use this as an opportunity to update the record increase its shelf life to see if anything has changed. But the worst that can happen is we've wasted some of our PPC budget, right? But the impact is significantly higher. Remember, we were paying between 50 and 100 pounds per lead with our content syndication and lead gen efforts. So getting a duplicate is well, we just couldn't afford to capture a duplicate from the more expensive lead gen activity. So we started by deduping all new records before we accepted them. But arguing over each duplicate with the media owner became such a hassle. So we came up with another way to go about this. We started what we called pre-duping the data against the advertiser's data. Basically, we started using a clean room solution to compare a hashed version of our data against a hashed version of what the media owner was going to market our offer to. And then we could tell them any data that we would not accept, right? And this worked out really well for a number of reasons. First, all of our existing customers were not going to get exposed to top of funnel content. So we had a much tighter control over the content they were getting. We also very quickly expanded our pre-dupe list to include former customers who maybe had left under less than ideal conditions and people who had unsubscribed from our marketing. And we didn't do this, but you could also include competitors on that list as well. Now, the last thing we focused on was intention. Remember that we're a company in the DevOps space. So our ideal lead is a senior leader in the software development department, head of DevOps, head of QA, head of application testing, head of development, these kinds of titles, right? We didn't care if a junior developer wanted our content to improve their career, but we weren't going to market to them. So we didn't. We used smart data routing to basically just park that data off to the side, right? We still had to pay for it, but you can't help that, which is less than ideal. Although to be fair, that job title never should have gotten through because it was in our lead specification. So I would have gone back and argued that probably as well. But they didn't end up in our database. Now, just a quick review. I've only talked about 4 of the 9 ways, the 4 things we focused on first to keep our data good. Validation, verification, removing the duplicates, and only keeping the data that you're going to use. And I want to walk you through what happened next, because we discovered something really amazing. As I said earlier, we had forecast that we needed 10,000 leads per year based on our conversion rates at the time, right? Those 10,000 leads would turn into 8,000 new conversations and result in 700 new sales. And all that was based on our historical data and the fact we had a goal of 6.5 million in new business revenue. But after we improved our data quality went from 80% to 98%. We got the bounce in revenue you would have expected, right? More new conversations, 858 new sales, and an additional 1.5 million revenue, potentially ending up 23% over budget. What we didn't expect, however, was that by putting better data into the top of the funnel, our conversion rate improved without making any other changes. Turns out when salespeople are happy and are able to have better conversations, they sell more stuff. So our conversion rate almost doubled, resulting in the revenue increasing by 110%. In other words, it had more than doubled. Or I should say it would have doubled if we let it go unchecked, but we didn't. Instead, we decided to deploy the budget elsewhere, frankly, including plugging it right to the bottom line. So as you can see here, with our new conversion rate, we needed less than 400,000 pounds to hit our target. And just by cleaning up the data, we were able to go from wasting 1.4 million to saving 420,000, basically a 2 million pound swing. Okay, 1 minute left. Apologies for that, but going back to our original question, how much should we spend to clean up our bad data? Well, anything less than 2 million pounds, and we would have been, as we say here in the UK, quids in. Thank you for taking the time to join me today. I'm sorry I didn't leave time for any questions. If there are any questions, I will answer them. So come back to this session later and you'll see the answers in the question area. If you'd like to connect with me, I'm at Skip Fidura across pretty much every platform, or you can check out my website at skipfidura.live. I hope you have a great rest of ParDreamin, a great Friday, a great weekend, and I hope to see you soon.